Welcome everyone to the Saturday afternoon selection of panels for the Body Conference. This afternoon we're going to start with a panel called Performing Bodies, which will address issues of bodies in performance, bodies as metaphor, and our panel, of course, will consist of Courtney World, Toby Hickson, and Julia Beinek. Without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Professor Betsy Sandlin to provide our first introduction.
Hello, good afternoon. It's a pleasure, really a thrill to introduce our first panelist, Courtney World. She's Assistant Professor of Theater and Dance here at Sewanee. She received her BA in Dance from the University of Buffalo, her MFA in Choreography and Performance from the College at Brockport, and she's also been a performer of modern and tap dance with Bill Evans Dance Company and Biodance, and the title of her paper today is Challenging the Ballet Body with Somatic Dance Practices.
Tech forgot to do something.
Hi. I went back and forth about what I wanted to present as part of this conference, and I first thought about performing, but decided that I wanted to give a little bit of insight into the way that the discipline of dance talks about and writes about the body. So I'll read to you a paper called Challenging the Ballet Body Through Somatic Dance Practices. Now, somatic dance practices give voice and agency to the silent dancing body. They value the inner life of the dancer and challenge the way that dancers train in all forms, including ballet. Through this honoring of individuality and personal uniqueness over homogeneity, somatic dance informs dancers of unsafe, injurious practices, awakens the body to awareness of sensations, including pleasure and pain, and frees the mind to question, critically engage with material, and challenge the use of blind tradition. Each of these outcomes are in direct opposition to the desired outcomes of traditional ballet training, which is to produce a body that will conform within the corps de ballet. The ideal female ballet body in particular is the subject of this paper. This body has been shaped and molded for centuries by the traditions of the classical ballet class. Before I dive into the world of ballet training and defining somatics and its applications in dance, let's take a brief moment to welcome our physical bodies into the conversation. I invite you to close your eyes for a moment, to just place your feet firmly in contact with the floor. And if it's comfortable, to feel the sinking and spreading of your sits bones on your chair, the widening of the back of your pelvis, to allow your arms to hang freely at your sides or in your lap, and begin to activate a lengthening reach vertically upward through the skull. And just notice for a moment if you're holding any tension in your jaw, and if so, allow it to drop and to release. And take a deep breath. Notice where you feel movement in your torso as a result of the breath. Is it high in your rib cage? Is it a deep belly breath? You may notice that you have more access to your breath in one or two of your three dimensions. Can you find a deeper, fuller breath in all three dimensions? In a full, voluminous way that fills the abdominal cavity, allowing for mobility in the rib cage. And now feel free to open your eyes as you continue this investigation of three-dimensional breath, or simply find a comfortable position as I continue on. You've just had a brief taste of a somatic experience. As a somatic dance educator, I now incorporate an opening ritual, much like this one, in all of my classes. It gives dancers an opportunity to tune in to their own bodily experience. I guide them through a set, structured experience that allows them to notice, listen to, and observe their inner life, to connect with their breath, and develop awareness of the present moment. Breath, through cellular respiration and lung respiration, is the first of the human developmental movement patterns examined in the Laban-Bartenieff somatic practice, which is the basis of my pedagogical framework. Rudolf Laban created a system for observing, analyzing, and notating movement and dance, and his protege, Irmgard Bartenieff, a physical therapist who worked with dancers, developed a system of reorganizing neuromuscular patterning based on fundamental human movements. Somatics is a term coined by Thomas Hanna around 1980. from the root word soma, meaning Greek meaning the body, to describe a field of movement studies concerned with the internal perception of the body through first-person proprioception. In my use of the term somatics throughout this paper, I'm referring primarily to my own personal experiences through the lens of Laban-Bartenieff, while drawing from other personal experiences and other somatic forms, including Alexander technique, Feldenkrais, Traeger, idiokinesis, and even Pilates and yoga to a certain extent when used for the purpose of cultivating mind-body awareness for dance training. For additional context about the developments in training classical ballet dancers, a broad sweeping overview of some ballet history might be helpful. Ballet began to take shape in the 17th century courts of King Louis XIV, primarily featuring male dancers, including himself, a highly skilled dancer who starred as the Sun King, a role that helped elevate his image to that of divinity. According to Deidre Kelly, in Ballerina, Sex, Scandal, and Suffering Behind the Symbol of Perfection, dance was used by Louis XIV as exertion of control, power, as well as to teach courtly decorum and etiquette. Skilled dancing was a requirement of all nobility in his court and used as a means for social mobility. A faux pas, literally a missed step at court, could result in loss of social status. It is not until the Romantic era that we see women at the center of the ballet. The Romantic era gave birth to the rise of the ballerina, with technological advances in the pointe shoe, and gas lighting creating ethereal images of the feminine ideal. Here we have Marie Taglioni depicted. Toward the end of the Romantic era, the ideal degree of turnout changed from 45 degrees to 90 degrees. So the outward rotation from the hips, 45-degree angle now to a 90-degree angle, using torture devices to shape and mold the hips, knees, and ankles into the correct form, as you see here. So no regard for the structure or the damage that might do long term. These changes led to continued obsession over the ballet body as the feminine object of desire in the classical era. The aesthetic line of the leg changed from soft and slightly bent and to a rigid and straight knee with a hard point shoe at the tip, a phallic symbol, written about extensively in Peter Stoneley's A Queer History of the Ballet. This image is then heightened by the elongated line and exposure of the upper thigh with the shortened tutu. So you see here a classical image of a ballerina, and then a romantic image of the ballerina and the romantic tutu, and then the classical ballet line, which changed. In the 20th century, George Balanchine further shaped the development of ballet by creating contemporary plotless ballets, creating an iconic ballerina body to suit his choreography. An even more sexualized image of the ballet dancer, now more womanly than maiden, though still denied of feminine curves or developed muscles. And you see George Balanchine with his New York City ballet dancers. The ideal ballet body is depicted here. This is an international standard of the ideal ballet body stemming from the classical era. Some characteristics facilitate better technique, others are merely aesthetically preferable, such as a long neck and small head. The widely accepted standard is featured in this book, Classical Ballet Technique by Gretchen W. Warren. And there's certain height, narrowness of the hips, proportions, etc. I'll leave that up for a little bit. George Balanchine further defined this ideal body with a desire for absolute thinness, visible bones, and an elongated neck with angular arms, as exemplified in the body of Suzanne Farrell, his muse. We have Suzanne Farrell here. Her image became the new standard in the age of Balanchine, which has continued long past his legacy. Obvious problems resulted when aspiring dancers were not born with the right body type, such as eating disorders, drug addictions, even plastic surgery, described in personal accounts of Gelsey Kirkland in her autobiography, Dancing on My Grave. The desire to change the body leads to debilitating injury as dancers work under the assumption that the body is under the mind's control to be shaped, molded, and formed into the correct image. There's currently a divide occurring in the professional ballet world over more traditional modes of teaching, whether associated with a specific technique such as Vaganova, or a syllabus-based approach governed by a certifying entity such as the Royal Academy of Dance or American Ballet Theater's certification program, versus the incorporation of somatic techniques into ballet classes and drawing from multiple ballet traditions. Traditional methods reinforce long-standing structures, and somatic practices challenge these structures. And I've made a chart here of the differences between the traditional classical ballet class versus a somatic dance technique class, including somatically taught ballet. And so on the left, we have unchanging structure versus flexible structure, passive, silent bodies versus active and interactive bodies, imitation from the external versus exploration from the inside out, mind over body, use of mind to control the body versus integrated mind and body, authoritarian ways of teaching versus democratic, oppressed bodies versus empowered bodies, privileging the visual over all other ways of learning versus multiple inroads of learning, relying on external feedback versus developing the ability to self-correct and rely on internal feedback, producing homogeneity versus cultivating individuality and difference, reproduction of the visual image and aesthetic at all costs, glorifying pain as a means of mastery over the body, versus honing awareness of sensation and encouraging and honoring bodily wisdom, silencing and repressing the body versus giving the body voice and choice, product-oriented versus process-oriented, superficial, looking at the bones and muscles as points of reference versus whole systems, ways of approaching from fluids and organ systems. Language is demanding versus language that's inviting, and reinforcing existing models versus reinventing systems for creating, pursuing, and discovering new possibilities. Now, if we look at ballet through the premise posited by Joanne Kalyanimonomoku, probably butchered that, but in her seminal article, An Anthropologist Looks at Ballet as an Ethnic Form of Dance, ballet is the ethnic dance of the European white elite aristocracy. However, ballet has become so widespread around the world as a representation of all that is aesthetically beautiful and classically harmonious, with its symmetry, line, grace, lightness, gentility, representation of social customs, reinforced gender roles, and courtship in the pas de deux, the ever-reaching desire to ascend heavenward toward the divine, the unattainable ideal and the goal of perfection, a pure body, young and chaste, that most do not question why or how this came to be the epitome of what is considered universally beautiful. It is important to note that ballet, in its refined codified form, taught in French worldwide, exerted control over the body, separating it from its earthly, primal, rhythmic, cultural, and folk dances of the people, which were sometimes and sometimes still are viewed as unrefined, primal, primitive, sexualized, and impure. The female body in ballet has come under the direct control of mostly men, whose power is to mold these dancing bodies into works of art that suit their vision, making them objects of desire and stripping them of agency. In particular, George Balanchine manipulated ballerinas in this way. According to Becky Dyer, in her article, Merging Traditional Technique Vocabularies with Democratic Teaching Perspectives in Dance Education, a consideration of aesthetic values and their socio-political contexts, there is no doubt that Balanchine was a brilliant choreographer, but all he really wanted was a group of mindless dancers who would perform his choreography as he wished it to be performed, and only that. He didn't want dancers to think. I would argue that somatic dance practices such as Laban and Bartiniev's work prepare us to study dance forms of foreign cultures by examining movement as individual expressions of human emotion and lived experiences. Somatic practices ask us to question, reflect, discover, leading dancers to think critically about why we maintain certain traditions in the ballet class, why certain exercises are performed, and why they are done in a particular order. This leads to the development of critical thought that may lead some dancers to question why certain types of movement are valued more highly than others. For example, why is a turned-out arabesque line with a fully extended knee and ankle more aesthetically pleasing and beautiful than a Japanese Butoh performance, or a pure expression of joy and celebration and covert rebelliousness against authority in Jamaican folk dance John Canoe? The inward focus of somatics eventually shifts outward as we learn to use our sense of ourselves as a means to relate with others, our environment, and the world. This shift serves to undermine the existing aesthetic values of ballet as the dominant form, ultimately shaking the system from the ground up, or perhaps more accurately, from the inside out. There are many examples of ballet teachers in New York City who teach somatic-based ballet classes for professional dancers, where ballet dancers and modern dancers take class side by side. For example, at the Gibney's Dance Center, Amy Miller's class is described as ballet, a somatic practice, providing an alternative to a strict classical approach to ballet, using momentum to consider the specificity of ballet. This class encourages personal exploration and internal sensation and is designed to prioritize the use of a highly articulate and powerful core. These types of classes are popular because they cultivate heightened awareness and clarity of intention in movement, the ability to intuitively adapt through improvisation, and to express with personal artistry. These are desirable skills for performers of any dance form, including ballet. In Jennifer Hillman's articles, Steps, 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 she laments that ballet is becoming a slave to technique and mechanical reproduction of lifeless steps. In a critique of a 2002 performance of the American Ballet Theater, she states, "What seems clear is that the ballet can never be the same. What began with Marie Taglioni is over. The ballerina is now a thin, empty shell of herself. She no longer has the force or the intelligence to steer an art. Whether that is good news or bad news depends on the self-knowledge of artists. If they stick to the barren path of perfection, classical ballet may perish." The recent trend has been for companies to move away from producing only full-length classical ballets, instead appealing to younger audiences by creating mixed bills featuring contemporary choreographers and shorter works that appeal to society's dwindling attention span. This new contemporary choreography places different and often unpredictable demands on bodies to move in ways that are not part of the traditional ballet class canon. Dancers are seeking additional means of training their bodies to adapt and navigate between contemporary and classical. The traditional ballet class is no longer serving the contemporary ballet dancer for the choreography she will need to perform. I believe that somatic practices are the solution to bringing dancers back to their bodies formerly viewed as disembodied instruments, as tools of the art. Somatics has the power to bring dancers back into personal human experiences that value individuality, difference, relationship, and artistry in ways that classical ballet training has previously silenced.
Thank you, Courtney. Our next speaker this afternoon is Toby Hickson, who is a December 2014 graduate of the University of the South. While here, he designed for himself a major in comparative literature, and his thesis concerned performativity in the 19th century adultery novel. He'll be speaking to us today on Kozlowski's Trois Couleurs Blancs. Mr. Hickson.
Thank you for inviting me to submit an abstract and get away from teaching middle schoolers for a couple of days. Upon hearing the subject of the conference would be the body, I thought of performativity and the implications of failed performances as such, largely in the context of my thesis, considering I already had some sources readily available. Failure to adequately perform social constraints in the sense of intentionality through the body results in a perceived sense of inequality, which manifests as humiliation, in itself a delicate and deliberate performance further scrutinized by others with the potential for failure. This sort of mise en abîme could devolve my inquiry into an M.C. Escher-esque nightmare. But I will possibly avoid this pitfall in focusing on a film that intersects the body, performance, inequality, and humiliation. In the film, Trois Couleurs Blancs, Krzysztof Kieślowski explores the constant performances for dominance and struggle for superiority seemingly inherent in all human relationships. Representing the French ideal of égalité in the Trois Couleurs trilogy, the filmmaker uses character performances to speak more to inequality and the necessity for power and control. The performative aspect of the body then emerges simultaneously as a manipulative tool in the power struggle between the protagonists and an indicator of a lack of control in physical relationships due to social constraints, even in these types of intimate battles. Ultimately, Kieslowski suggests that through our body acts, we must create our equality by achieving greater or lesser inequality, which we accomplish in attempting to lessen or broaden the inequality of others. Kieslowski's self-proclaimed central thesis of the film White, and I'll use both the English and French interchangeably to a specific end, creates an ironic notion of equality as revenge or getting even, a sense of justice almost. For Kieslowski, equality, like matter in the universe, is fixed and finite, neither to be created nor destroyed, but transferred in a transactional relationship. He predicates human relationships, particularly romantic or physical ones, in a similar manner throughout the film. In simplest terms, someone's profit requires someone else's loss, even in love. In this paper, I intend to partially reject and modify this notion of equality by examining the body performances of Kieslowski's characters, mainly Carol and Dominique, whose power struggle suggests less a shift of equality, but a fundamental misunderstanding of it. I appreciate the irony of the transactional relationship of these theses, and I'll neither wholly dismiss his claim, nor suggest that I offered the only genuine or exhaustive understanding of equality in the film. Kieslowski's decision to explore the ideals represented in the French flag beyond a political sphere and in as vague a manner as possible prevents anyone, including the filmmaker himself, from conclusively defining equality. In dealing with body performances, I need to qualify the language used in the paper to emphasize the principle of performance in manipulating the body to realize a goal. This encompasses both intentionality within physical acts and the sort of immediate presentations to satisfy social normatives. I frame my context in Irving Goffman, Judith Butler, and Caroline Bynum. In the preface to Goffman's presentation of self in everyday life, he asserts to utilize the perspective of theatrical performance so that the principles derived are dramaturgical ones. Borrowing the vernacular of literal stage performances provides a fruitful foundation for a report on the quotidian acts of self in framing identity. Butler elaborates on this to its fullest extent in claiming that individuals create all aspects of identity, including both sex and gender, race, nationality, and so forth. I then locate Butler's thesis and application to the notion of equality and use Bynum's terminology of the identity position and her description of Butler's argument. Since Bynum succinctly and simply situates Butler, and since the conference is named after her, I felt obligated to reference her at some point. For the purposes of this paper, I'll deconstruct the film into a basic three-act structure to which the narrative lends itself. The film and the first act open on a shot of a suitcase moving down a conveyor belt, which is then edited next to footage of feet walking urgently on a sidewalk. Both the conveyor belt and the treading feet set the momentum for the narrative, and the elliptical editing of the two suggests some correlation. Eventually, the viewer learns the significance of that suitcase. It contains the film's hero, Carol Carroll, secretly exiting France and returning to his native Poland. Kieslowski offers the attentive viewer hints to the contents of the suitcase. The name of the actor who portrays Carol appears on the screen first as the initial words, Zbigniew Zamachowski, directly giving credit to the performer himself without the audience realizing it. This is the first body in the movie, and as it is hidden, it discludes a performative quality. Yet the comical notion that a man has crammed himself in a suitcase for air travel elicits the same primeval chortle in viewing a successful comedic performance. Even when not visible, for Kieslowski, the body must perform. The film continues to cut to the suitcase several times in the first 10 minutes, but the camera pans up from the hurrying feet to reveal Carol Carroll, a diminutive man with a pigeon-toed gait who comports himself in an explicitly Chaplin-esque fashion. Carol means Charlie in Polish, and Kieslowski made this association as evident as possible. He stops in front of a courthouse and pleasantly ponders the pigeons until one defecates on him, presenting our first glimpse of White. This sets the tone of abject humiliation Carol will endure in the first act of the film. Once inside the courthouse, the audience meets Dominique, Carol's wife, played by Julie Delpy, standing on the opposite side of a courtroom, demanding a divorce for the concrete reason of his inability to consummate the marriage, a first failed social constraint. Their physical separation in the room reinforces an emotional distance. and Dominique's assertion that she does not love him sends him to vomit in a blindingly white toilet. Carol rushes out of the courthouse to profess his love to Dominique, but she merely offers a painfully French wave with a gloved hand, simultaneously signaling her exit and dismissing Carol for his shortcomings, literally. Dominique, performing her identity through hand gestures, recurs several times, and I was originally going to speak to the idea of partitioning or compartmentalizing of the body, but I can address that in questions. With his marriage crumbling before him, Carol attempts to withdraw funds from the bank, where a curt employee informs him his accounts are frozen and viciously cuts the bank card in half right before his eyes. Multiple critics, Merrick Haltoff and Paul Coates especially, have noted the resonance here with castration, made evident in Carol's wincing visage as the blades unfeelingly sever his prospects. He feels the pain of separating almost viscerally and cannot help but show it. That evening, without sufficient funds, he remains on the sidewalk, and the most blatant representation of a lack of equality appears as he watches a poor old woman attempt to place a bottle in a collection bin. Carol smirks in recognition of the difficulty of the woman and realizes that perhaps his problems are not totally unique. In the first film of the trilogy, Blue, Juliette Binoche's character revels in her new sense of freedom and does not even acknowledge the plight of an old woman in a similar situation. In the final film, Rouge, the judge aids yet another, perhaps the same, old woman in her efforts. Kieslowski uses the frailty and hardships of aging to directly show the three ideals of the French Revolution here: equality, liberty, and fraternity in the performative actions of everyday life. After sleeping in the salon he operates with Dominique as a hairdresser, Carol attempts one last time to fulfill his perceived manly duties and consummate his marriage. Earlier in the courthouse, Carol mentions no problem with copulation when the couple resided in his native Poland. He playfully mimes swallowing the keys to the salon to prevent Dominique from taking them from him. This comedic display places Dominique on top of him and perhaps reminds her of previous intimacy. Intercourse commences, but Carol fails to complete the act and only has a minuscule pardon to offer. Dominique releases her frustrations at this point. Importantly, she does not release frustration for his failure to copulate, but for her claim that he does not understand her love, or love in general. She continues to assert that she will always win, and proves this in setting ablaze the white curtains to frame him for arson. Dominique directly utilizes the language of games in their relationship, where surely there must always be a loser and a winner. Carol exits the building abruptly, his life now literally in flames. Carol's redemption and move toward equality begins when he meets a fellow native of Poland as he attempts to gain pocket change from playing music with a comb and handkerchief in a metro station. Nikolai, a respectable and perhaps wealthy individual from Poland, recognizes the tune, The Last Sunday, that Carol plays. Carol's patently Polish performance attracts attention from a commiserating soul of the same identity position, Polish, which signals hope for him. After speaking with Nikolai, he plans to stow away in his suitcase and return to Poland. He had left his homeland to live with his beautiful wife after meeting her at a hairdressing convention. And all his time in France brought him was humiliation and despair. To start the path to equality, he must return to Poland and abandon the land of his cruel and disappointing marriage. Nikolai emerges as a sort of guardian angel and provides him with the possibility to reconcile his national identity by earning some extra cash in a deal to murder a man who no longer desires to live. That man evidently being Nikolai himself. Before redemption can commence, however, Carol appropriately must endure a final and almost annihilating humiliation to seemingly erase all prospects of reconciliation and contentedness while in France. He wishes to show off Dominique to Nikolai, which speaks to his objectifying, obsessive, and beatific misunderstanding of her. So he points out her window across from the metro station. Nikolai mistakes his demonstrative gesture for a poster of Brigitte Bardot in the Godard film Le Mépris, or The Contempt. The voyeurs view a silhouette of a woman and a man in the window, whereupon Carol frantically telephones Dominique. When learning it is Carol on the line, she responds in the imperative, "Good timing, listen." Carol listens in horror as she moans in coital satisfaction, putting on a show for his greatest humiliation. One of the most deliberately and intentionally performative moments once again occurs with the performer not visible on screen. There you see him listening to the conversation in horror. Carol stows away inside of his suitcase, which contains only himself, a 2-franc coin, and a white bust of a beautiful woman, reminiscent of Francis Marion and Carol's fantasy vision of his wife. Smugglers steal the suitcase, believing it contains fantastic valuables, and beat Carol when realizing nothing else is inside. Despite the end of his marriage and the horrible circumstances of arriving in Poland after so long, Carol smiles and celebrates his homeland. The smugglers break the bust of Marion while assaulting Carol, and the symbol of France lies shattered at his feet as he revels in the glory of Poland. However, he cannot escape his beatific vision of Dominique and French women in general, and meticulously paste the bust back together. He maintains an understanding of national pride that initially allowed him to set off on the road for equality while in Poland, but keeps the reminders of France close at hand until he exhausts their usefulness. Carol briefly attempts to escape this connection when he tries to throw the 2-franc coin piece into the river. Tellingly, it sticks to his hand and simultaneously reinforces his inability to lose that obsession with Dominique and the metonymy of the hand associated with Dominique. I will quickly go over the second and much of the third acts of the film, highlighting a few key performative moments, and in order to rush to get to the climax, just as Carol has been trying to do over the course of the film. I do this not necessarily because it is the weakest part of the film or the time constraints of the presentation, but because it is the least strong and I only have 15 minutes. Once again, I appreciate the irony of taking time to make the joke while ruminating about time limitations. The first Polish performative moment occurs when Carol literally does what he is best at, firing blanks. The most intense and poignant scene in the film occurs when Carol meets Mikołaj, again in the subway platform, to perform their predetermined arrangement and carry out a supposedly merciful death sentence. Carol fires the gun, and Mikołaj falls forward as the audience believes he dies. But Carol only fired a blank. Mikołaj states he wishes to die, but despite all the struggle and difficulties he endures, Carol still values life in general and appreciates that Mikołaj should be absolutely certain of it. Mikołaj accepts that he wants to live, and the two celebrate joyously in a white field of snow. This moment best represents the theme of equality and the most equal two platonic people can be with each other. Hopefully not offending Bynum too much, but the only true essentialist quality that all humans share and unites all different aspects of people and identity positions is life itself. Dominique may humiliate Carol, but he still has his life. And the greatest positive and unambiguous lesson that Kieślowski imparts is understanding the value of that life. Moving away from unambiguity, a word I made up for this segue, the second Poland performance returns Carol to his obsession with his fantasy of love and need to overcome his failures. He begins learning French with cassette tapes, and while practicing the French language, he also practices French kisses. I apologize for that one. He shares a passionate kiss with the white bust, as the voice on the tape goes over the past subjunctive for the verb plaire, que j'ai plu, would that I had pleased. Carol and the film reflect on the failures from France and a future white resolution to come. The middle section of the film sets the stage for Carol's act of vengeance toward the end. Through some questionable business practices, pretending to be asleep to overhear important land purchasing activities, a performance of actively playing a passive role, Carol begins to evolve into a modern Polish capitalist, with corruption, slicked back hair, and even a Volvo. After convincing Mikołaj of the value of life, he convinces him as well to join him in a legal business endeavor. The genuine reason for making so much money so quickly starts to peek forward when he modifies his will to transfer all of his assets to his ex-wife after his death. Thus, Carol initiates the process of faking his own death. The first necessity for this pursuit is an alternate corpse which he acquires in a Russian import, since anyone can get anything nowadays. While this initial corpse switcheroo initially appears merely as the comic trope, It elicits multiple questions regarding identity, performance, and the body, which could be explored in a separate paper. Carol's plan begins to take effect, and he once again watches Dominique voyeuristically at his own funeral. She evidently traveled to Poland purely to receive the money from his will, but when she remains solely at the grave, she removes a glove delicately and begins to cry. Dominique returns to her hotel room to find Carol naked and posed in her bed and states, "I wanted you to come to Poland." He convinces her he is real and actually the Carol that she was married to. Again, implications of identity position within the body. He offers his hand for her touch for confirmation of his materiality, and the camera lingers on the close-up of the hands touching there. Dominique's now fully exposed and vulnerable. The camera fades to black and returns to the couple laying in bed beginning intercourse. The camera fades to black again as Dominique's moans build in intensity until the image bursts forth in a flash of total white at the moment of climax for Dominique, the film, and Carol's plan. The next morning, the police arrive and arrest Dominique for Carol's murder after receiving an anonymous tip from Mikolai that she was in Poland the day of his death, which a forged passport will confirm. Dominique goes to prison, and Carol prepares for a life in hiding as an unperson. He runs the comb across his eyes, signaling a sense of bars that will be reflected in Dominique behind her prison wall. The film ends there, neatly transacting Carol framing Dominique for Dominique framing Carol in the first act of the film. Kieslowski's thesis of equality being the struggle for less inequality remains intact, except the film does not actually end at that point. Carol cannot fully execute his plan of going into hiding since he finally understands how Dominique needed to be understood. He goes to see her at the prison to view her from afar as voyeur one last time. Instead, she notices him, and the camera pans in closer, and her bars disappear, seemingly. And she uses her hands once again to express her desires once she leaves the prison. She points to Carol and gestures putting on an invisible ring, proposing marriage once again, not between equals, but between two people who finally understand each other. This epilogue ending undercuts an essentialist view of equality that Kieslowski offered. Their performances are framed in the color white, which, as Jeff Andrew puts it, has a double-edged resonance that can be viewed in the dualistic sense of body as physical and soul as something spiritual. In a dreamlike flashback, apparently from Carol's point of view as the groom, Dominique walks out of a church in her white wedding dress surrounded by white. This scene first appears in the courthouse and recurs throughout, but in the last instance, juxtaposed with Carol looking through the comb, the view shifts slightly to reveal Carol kissing Dominique, apparently not from his perspective. His fantasy must then meet reality. He achieved the white vision once again at the end, but cannot be with Dominique in his status as an unperson. And perhaps, as the last wedding flashback indicates, the equality existed the entire time, or never existed, and that never needed to exist at all. Carol and Dominique use their bodies and identity performances in an effort to achieve dominance in their power struggles, but their performances also emerge organically in a sort of everyday presentment. Carol enacts Dominique's cruelty and manipulation from France while in Poland, and Dominique enacts Carol's vulnerability and exposure from France while in Poland as well. Not necessarily in a reductive sense of equality as walking in someone else's shoes, but in understanding and appreciating the different and multifaceted performances each made in their own presentations and to each other. Perhaps equality then can be achieved not in a transitory way, but in valuing the performative lives of others and ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. And last we have Justina Beinek, as you all know, the director of the Mellon Globalization Forum and also the organizer of this wonderful conference, so we thank her for that. She also teaches in IGS and Russian here at Sewanee. She has her MA in Comp Lit from UCSD and a PhD from Harvard in Slavic languages and literatures. And before coming to Sewanee, she also taught at the University of Toronto and Indiana University. And today she's talking about Cecilia Malik, Embodiment, Echo Art, Ephemerality.
Just want to preface that by something I tell my students, undergraduate and my former graduate students, never do that at any conference. Because I want to say that it's probably a really bad idea to try to deliver a paper in a field you know nothing about while organizing a conference. And I tell them never apologize, you just have to do it. So I'd like to tell you today about the Polish painter, performance artist, and environmental activist by the name of Cecilia Malik, who creates ephemeral projects that focus on environmental issues and the use of public space around the city of Krakow, Poland, where she lives. In her and this is her, of course, in her echo art, Malik uses her own female body and bodies of other people who are usually participants in her projects and whose numbers are frequently in the thousands, in ways that are both surprising and effective in terms of their artistic gravitas, as well as galvanizing the public to join Malik in her protests that consistently, and perhaps even surprisingly for me, yield real-life political results. And in that sense, Malik's treatment of the body approximates that of Michel Foucault's idea of the body as a, as he says, political instrument or useful force. I also would like to reflect with you, since I'm fairly new to what Malik does, on another aspect of Malik's work, namely ephemerality and a certain poetic or dreamlike quality of her echo art, a quality that, surprisingly for me again, emerges from Malik's decidedly earthly materials, human bodies of all ages, shapes, and forms, and inanimate matter, such as water, plants, wood, and fabric. Since I assume that perhaps not that many of you in this room are experts on Cecilia Malik, I thought that a good starting point for our reflection on what it is that she does and why she's so successful at it, a good starting point is perhaps to just consider briefly her artistic credo. So she's often she often says in interviews that she wants to, quote, defend beauty with beauty, unquote. And she also has said that she wants to fight political and environmental battles by creating projects that are, and I'm just going to say these 4 adjectives: crazy, funny, beautiful, and nice. And this is, sort of surprisingly naive almost for me. She is a professor at the Krakow Academy of Fine Art, and for a relatively young woman, she's a very high-profile artist. And I'd like you to sort of consider these seemingly naive statements in the context of her artistic activities. A renowned painter, Malik first became famous as performance artist in 2009-10 for her critically acclaimed project, 365 Trees, during which she climbed a different tree every day for 1 year and had herself photographed. And that was based on Italo Calvino's 1957 book, The Baron and the Trees. She turned her audience's attention to the frequently overlooked omnipresence of trees in big cities. Krakow's Poland's second biggest city after Warsaw. The tree's beauty, and also this incredible variation, since she climbed 365 different species of trees that she encountered in Krakow, southern Poland, and she sort of went to Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Hungary as well. She pointed out the precariousness of the tree's existence in large polluted cities such as Krakow. Krakow has terrible smog issues. Precariousness augmented by the sense of danger in which she put her own body, since she climbed trees that were often tall and difficult to climb, and I'll show you lots of images in a second. Her stylized poses and costumes added a colorful self-portraiture element to her portraits of trees, thus pointing to the natures and people's similarly precarious position. And I will show you, so there are 365 of these, and these images don't look all that great in that room, but I think you will get a very good idea of what it is she does. And there's a mix of these urban cityscapes and sort of typical landscapes of southern Poland and Slovakia. Let's see. Yeah, and this. There's some where you can barely see her. I really like this one. And this is the poster she uses for this exhibit. Let me see what I have. Okay. In 2011, Malik involved thousands of Krakow's inhabitants in a performance project titled the Blue Monarch Butterfly Collective, which forced the city authorities and a Portuguese developer to scrap plans of building a high-rise condominium complex on the pristine Zakrzówek lakeside, and this is the lakeside on the edge of Krakow. During the performance, Malik orchestrated, and I will in a minute show you lots of snippets from it, thousands of Krakow's inhabitants donned self-made wings made of cardboard and painted blue, and her sister, who's also an artist, created a video tutorial on wing making, which went viral and was available on YouTube. The protest action against the urban development of green areas surrounding this lake, as I said, involved thousands of people with attached blue wings parading around the city. And this protest culminated in a Saturday spent on the lake, during which those people butterflies participated in a huge picnic, ate, drank, made music, danced, and swam in the lake. And the development plans have been scrapped by the city and the developer, and this all lasted a very long time. And just this week, she posted on Facebook that after 5 years, this is certain that the authorities of Krakow will not have that complex of buildings built there. And she said that in fact it had taken 10 years, but for 5 years, sort of like regular activists were writing letters and just getting signatures, and then finally they turned to her, and with her blue wings, they prevailed. Mm-hmm. So this is a part of the happening. This is she in the lower left corner. And she also encouraged people to just put those wings on, and if people went shopping or to a post office, they could just wear them, and whenever she went somewhere on the bike, she would just take her wings with her. This means we want to swim. And what's interesting about her projects is that they're very inclusive. She's got kids. She involves the elderly, really people from all straight up life. So this is this sort of massive bathing. This is her. Oh, she also encouraged people to put those feelers on their heads. These are really great. Oh, can you see anything? See, and this is actually her family. So after sort of there's so many stages of this. The Krakow authorities were sort of agreeing to something, and then they were going back, and I've been following all this. But it's quite a remarkable lake. It's her dog Husky. I say that because I will mention her again. All right. So to bring in Foucault again, I just want to say, because I think what I'm trying to figure out about her work is how this tension works between this seemingly, sort of very free artistic action and this sort of disciplined design of it. And I'm surprised that actually whenever I think about what she does, actually Foucault, with his ideas about discipline, comes to my mind quite a bit. And I want to say that, this seems what she likes best. I mean, as she said, she wants to do things that are crazy and funny and beautiful and nice. But she mobilizes thousands of people. And in that sense, I think her butterflies resemble Foucault's soldiers, whose physiques she kind of standardizes and she trains them to act a certain way. So even though her butterflies are oppositional to the dominant culture, actually the process, I think, resembles what Foucault writes about when he talks about soldiers being trained. Malik's 3 relatively recent projects have dealt with water and rivers. So 6 Rivers was a project whose goal was to showcase Krakow's polluted waterways and to clean and protect them. She filmed her voyages on these waterways with garbage floating in them and accumulated on the riverbanks, with a commentary provided by environmentalists, ornithologists, andrologists, etc. So together with these experts, she, by doing these films, she drew the public's and authorities' attention the miserable state of these waterways, and also showed how they could be used for recreational educational purposes where they cleaned up. And an extension of this project was a project called Water Critical Mass, and this is what you're seeing, which is an annual boating happening with a 5-year history, and it looks like everyone wants to keep doing it in the summer, which gathers thousands of people, and Krakow is just swarming with tourists in the summer, so it's not just the Krakow inhabitants, but basically it's, you can barely hear Polish if you go there in the summer, and all these people participate. And so you have thousands of people rowing, sailing, and floating on the Vistula River in artistic, homemade, or outlandish vessels and fitting costumes. And she's also very good about sort of researching the legal aspect of things. So she kind of writes it with big letters on social media. She uses extensively that there's no law that would not allow you to just build your own vessel and go sailing, right, on this Poland's biggest river. Again, this all seems kind of like this colorful free-for-all, but she's very thorough in sort of approaching the legal issue that well, as well. And one year, Malik performed as a seductive siren with a flashy tail as part of her costume. And another year, she floated on a custom-made tiny boat/island covered with grass, her husky patiently floating with her. It was a fantastical, oniric image, and I just want to show you some of these. And this is literally in the center of Krakow, a huge city with a historical market. Yeah, this is the island that she built. And this is her as a siren and her siren sisters. Now, we'll talk about it a little bit because, as you can see, she's wearing this new top. And I also, as we reflect on what she does, I'm kind of curious about how she actually, uses her body in Jean Baudrillard's sense. The body is the finest consumer objects, and how she actually uses eroticism for sort of selling her ideas. Yeah, so. Okay, so the last project I'll talk about, Cecilia Malik's 3rd water-themed environmental project from 2013, titled The Braids for the Białka River, focused on stopping regulation and development plans for a river in mountainous southern Poland, not far from Krakow, where she lives. She involved, again, thousands of people in Krakow and actually across Europe in the braiding or plaiting of the river's hair, quote unquote, out of donated scraps, dyed sheets, and fabrics. And people were braiding locally and sending her textile braids from across Europe. So 4 miles, and you can see here, I think it's her son, you can see her braiding. She actually, a prominent gallery in Krakow allowed her to use the large gallery for this, so that lasted actually several months, and every day, people came with kids, and elderly people came, and she sort of mobilized again lots of people in braiding those braids for the Białka River. And finally, they were given to a Białka River on a beautiful April day, not unlike today, in a day-long happening. So the river thus became personified and sort of feminized with the help of those textile braids. And the braids have become famous enough to function as an internationally traveling exhibit. So they were displayed in various parks in Belgium and Germany. And let me just show you how that worked. So the braids in the gallery, that's her. So then they went to that river, and that was the happening. And she's wearing the typical Highlander costume, and again, kind of speaking about the adorning of the body and the performance of the body. This is, a very interesting combination of jeans and then a folk costume that people have worn for generations, and these are usually sort of inherited from grandmas, etc. So these are the 4 miles of braids being laid out, and this is on the main market square in Krakow, which has this, I think, 10th century church, and she got the church authorities to agree to suspend these braids downward. Okay, and this is in Brussels. This is how those braids have been used since then. Let me see. Okay, this is my next thing. So, okay, and so this is the very last example of her work. So she's also been known for raising the awareness of environmental issues by creating a series of striking photographs in which she wears dresses made of real plants, flowers, tree branches, and moss, in which she wraps her own naked body and the bodies of her sisters, of whom she has like 7, her daughter, and her female friends for a few hours. The ephemeral plant dresses are then paraded in the Krakow city center, where their displacement and incongruity with the gritty cityscape raise eyebrows and questions. And she's also been criticized by environmental groups for destroying plants, such as the water lilies. But again, she has it all researched. So, yeah, and so she photographs these plant dresses, and this is one of her sisters, and then they are displayed on billboards, or I mean not billboards, but these standing structures in Krakow. Yeah, and this is sort of a mock fashion show in the center of Krakow, and I'm going to end on this. So now a few words of my reflection on her work. What links Malik's eco art projects beyond her interest in nature and the concrete political actions one can undertake to protect the environment is her intense use, as you've noticed, I'm sure, of the body, human and not human, or rather a wide range of bodies, collective bodies, individual bodies, men's, women's, and children's bodies, bodies old and young, animal bodies, plant bodies, bodies of water, the body of the city, and first and foremost, the body of the female artist that is herself. In all of her eco art projects in the last 5 or 6 years, the human body and the body of nature merge. And so, as you've seen, cardboard butterfly wings are attached to actual people's bodies, and feelers are attached to their heads. Fingernails are painted blue, almost, by volunteers. Human bodies are put in boats and vessels on lakes and rivers, and they frequently bathe and swim. And then fabric braids are given to a river, symbolically, who then wears those braids, as do those who had braided them. So again, to bring in Caroline Bynum, since almost every paper, this is an obligatory part, this will be the next conference topic. Actually what Malik does, I think, approximates to some extent what Bynum writes about the Aristotelian and medieval understanding of the body as the changeable thing. I quoted from that yesterday in the opening comments. And so Bynum says that matter can be animate and label. And to paraphrase Bynum, we might say that to explore the body for Malik is to explore this changeable body, to explore trees, bodies of water, to explore fabric and dye, as well as extinction and survival. Malik's own body is used for the creation of her art. So she herself climbs trees and collects plants to weave her dresses. In her eco art, bodies are put into motion. They swim, bike, dance, braid, climb, etc. The protests are physical and creative. So, something gets done. Braids are woven, wings are made, handmade vessels have to be designed and built. People have to actually go to a lake or river to protest, and then these protests turn into picnics, dances, mass swimming sessions, etc. So these are all corporeal activities. So my question when I look at all this is how and why is this effective? Or in other words, how on earth does this actually work so that, the authorities and developers actually scrap lots of their plans? On a limited budget, Malik comes up with ideas that don't require huge resources. So these are some of my provisional answers. She and her collaborators provide tutorials on how to make those wings out of cardboard, etc., how to braid fabric braids. During these activities, people create a community through doing things together and making art together. Art which is then displayed in public space, whose images are disseminated by media, which leads to the altering of the decisions made by city planners and developers. As I mentioned, I'm also curious, and I'll leave it for all of us to sort of think about. I'm curious about this use of eroticism and the use of the female body in all of this to sort of sell these ideas. And I also wonder about the ephemerality of these projects, whether this is something that actually helps for eco art, or since things are ephemeral, they just disappear, and potentially this could just lead to a big failure. So these performances are ephemeral in the sense that they are flashes in the pan and are repeatable and finite, since she climbs a given tree once and she lays out braids for the river once, and her butterfly friends disperse after one day. The traces Malik leaves are invisible. A river simply continues its existence. So nothing changes. I mean, this is the great result she wants, to preserve the status quo. Or a meadow and a lake stay the way they are, and they don't have high-rises put in there. Of course, the dresses are the most ephemeral ones, made of field plants and flowers. They of course offer some kind of alternative to the homogeneity of mass culture and mindless consumerism. And what's interesting for me is that in a culture, and these are huge generalizations, but I would say the Polish culture is very much obsessed with history and memory for obvious reasons of World War II, etc. Malik focuses on the organic and transitory, and so her own body merges with the body of a tree for a few minutes. Human bodies are transformed into butterflies for just a day, and the body of a river is temporarily adorned. In the age of a media deluge of representations of mutilated and traumatized bodies, and in the age of performance art that uses exposed, transgressive, and aggressive bodies as media for conveying messages, and here I assume most of you know these examples. So if you just think about Russia and Eastern Europe, of course, Pussy Riot and their punk music concerts in Russian Orthodox Church, it's a very different type of social activism. Or Femen, the Ukrainian group of women who bare their breasts, right? And now this is all over Europe, and I think, as Sarah and Shana know, these strategies kind of work outside of Europe as well. And then there's a Russian artist whom I find very interesting, although this is very controversial, by the name of Piotr Pawliński, who, for example, famously nailed his scrotum to the cobblestone pavement of the Red Square in Moscow. And he also recently literally sewed his mouth shut with threads to sort of show, the growing oppressiveness of Putin's government. So, in that context, vis-a-vis, these types of actions, this is very different. And I speculate that perhaps it's the gentleness with which Malik uses the human bodies for political purposes that has captivated audiences, and apparently the authorities as well. And here comes my very last small paragraph. So it might be the surprising act of anthropomorphization of the river and imagining her as possessing a female body, which perhaps makes people stop and think. Again, I'm trying to think, like, why do people buy that? Why do authorities actually buy that? It might also be the Bakhtinian carnivalesque treatment of the body that allows Malik to attract followers. So enjoyment experienced by her co-artists comes not only from the intellectual support for environmental ideas, but also from the involvement of the actual body that is sitting together with other bodies, that is braiding and talking. The body that's floating on the river with other bodies in silly vessels and silly costumes on a summer day. And the body merged for a while with the bodies of water, trees, flowers, and butterflies. So this gentleness of Malik's method equals the gentleness of these incredible political outcomes. Certain actions are stopped, and impermanent activities that approximate play, in this case, yield tangible and permanent, at least for the time being, results. Thank you.
So I think we have a few minutes left if there are any questions.
Yeah, thanks for the presentations, they're all great. I wanted to ask Justina to make a comment that, you made this kind of this analogy that she's disciplining bodies the same way that maybe the government is disciplining bodies, that Malik's performances force this discipline, and so that makes them less naive, right? But I'm thinking, and this is very antiquated Marxism, but that's what's happening in the performance is that what the government sees and the developer sees in this space is exchange value. So they're going to build it and sell it. And what Malik is doing is not so much becoming nature, but finding uses of nature that are kind of democratic and, like these bodies they're not claiming some kind of legality or closeness to this place, but really just the right for everybody to use them. So that was my comment.
Also thinking about Toby's presentation, haven't thought about it before, but these bodies are exceedingly democratic, right? I mean, everyone's a butterfly.
But it has to do with kind of the practice, right, of what they're doing and kind of agreeing on doing them. In a way, it's almost like stealing the government's idea, because I'm pretty sure that building the complex is like, listen, this is our idea of well-being, this is a nice building, it's going to be overlooking the lake. So what she's doing is in a way stealing this kind of, what legitimizes that process, right? No, actually, this is a way to lead. But then my question was, and this is going to lead to a bad word that is not used in Eastern Europe anymore, but isn't this idea of joy and being crazy and doing what you want and what happens in the works of art some kind of utopia that happens?
Well, we have utopia specialists sitting at that table.
They use a lot of bad words.
Yeah. Well, we can with Mark and Don and everyone talk about utopia. I'd say yes, of course, but there's always this moment. Also, whenever I think about her just naive statements, I want to do things that are fun and nice. There's this moment that actually works, and that's not utopia. Like serious money is being taken
I'm in
elsewhere.
favor of utopia.
Yeah. So, but of course, to have thousands of people with blue wings, and blue feelers sort of bathing in the lake. I mean, for a few hours, it is a utopia, but in my book, that's kind of a good thing.
I think Rosalind Luxembourg would love it.
Yeah. Well, I'll say my question. I have questions for art historians and Jeff and Shelley and actually the Egypt team, about what's happening on that front elsewhere, since this is completely out of my comfort zone, and I don't know much, but I think we should perhaps allow other panel participants to answer questions.
Lisa?
So that was really, all of the talks were intriguing, so I'm going to ask about the ballet. Is there any kind of impact on the sort of somatic training for people who are trying to enter into sort of defining their careers in a very specific way, or whatever you would say about that?
Yeah, I think it looks very differently, and I can really only speak to what's happening, I guess, in the U.S. or what I'm familiar with. But I think the traditional ballet schools are preparing students to go into ballet companies, which usually happens at a very young age, and there's not a lot of integration of somatic techniques in most ballet schools. That being said, I think the sites where there's most somatic training for ballet dancers is in college. I think in most colleges and universities there is somatic integration of ways of teaching, and in the professional realm, but not in the pre-professional ballet world. I think the models. There are changing models in terms of more science research, more anatomically sound ways of training dancers, but that tends to just weed out the dancers that don't have the right body, which is maybe a good thing. But for those that don't have the right ballet body, it doesn't leave any possibility for enjoying the art of ballet unless you have that body in the pre-professional world, which is where in college and in adult ballet or taking ballet for enjoyment, I think there's much more opportunity to experience and love the art of ballet in a safe way through somatic training.
Well, and so, sorry, one follow-up. That's intriguing that you associated them with college too, because you're also talking about how traditional ballet doesn't want thinking people, thinking bodies, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this association of thinking bodies with a technique that is safer, that considers the whole person.
Yeah.
Well, Tony, you had said that you wanted to speak about compartmentalized bodies in Q&A with a focus on the hand, so I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And then, Justina, I'm sorry I missed you, I saw Bill you afterwards. Right. And Justina, just two comments. Thinking about what Manuel said, and when you were talking about it, it occurs to me in the exchange value, what she brings to Krakow is and maybe it's already there, but kind of tourist competition and a place in Europe that actually moves beyond Poland's past in that history and sort of makes Poland this fun, hip, whatever it is place. And I was wondering if you could speak some about the value of these two. So to this government, as Manuel was saying, the value of having Krakow be this place that these things happen to cement it as sort of a New York. And the other thing is you talked so much about, or often about how ephemeral everything was, but she took pretty professional photographs, right? So she was creating, it seems to me, I mean,
documentation.
So why, for example, with the tree thing, wherein she creates these 365 very professional photographs, be any more ephemeral than any other photography exhibit where something's set up. So I was wondering if you could talk about that.
That was her very first thing when she moved beyond actual oil painting. So that was 7 years ago, and she did the trees, and as you could, I arranged my presentation chronologically so that you could sort of see the progression and the coming out of the, artist studio and sort of doing photography, but then doing these happenings.
The plant dresses, though, were up around town in large, tangible photographs, right?
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, she has a team of very high-profile photographers who do that, and I didn't talk about, how she, these performances are ephemeral. It's a few hours, but then she has a, very good sort of online documentation, good websites, and she has 25,000 people following her on Facebook, and so she does everything also, because, I'm always interested in sort of the economic side of things as well, and so she really uses any cheap or free channel she can, and you're right. I mean, she and others, her team, they document these things well, and you can. I don't know if you can tell in this room, but the quality of some of these photographs is just amazing. And so, yeah, these are the works of art, right? The objects of art that will stay once these ephemeral performances are over. And yeah, I'm sure, actually when Sarah and I and Pippa and others, we were in South Carolina at the Arts of the Present conference last fall, our colleague happened to be in Krakow when Cecilia suspended those braids from Poland's most famous Gothic church in the middle of the market square that, looks like any beautiful market square in Italy, and the Renaissance market square. And so so she could actually talk about what it felt like to be in the crowd watching this happen. And you're right that I think, on the one hand, Malik is always sort of in the opposition to the city authorities, but on the other hand, I'm glad you brought this point, and I haven't thought about it, that they might be sort of secretly funding her or cheering her on, because it does make this city, which is known as, the historical seat of Polish kings, and it's got the castles and the, Renaissance churches, it just, as you said, it makes it sort of more hip and alive, right? So against this backdrop of history, she creates something very contemporary.
Well, I like the idea of compartmentalizing the body, especially because he's literally placed in a compartment. But Bynum's discussion of partitioning the body was what I was going to address, and I think there's an interesting idea that Kieslowski wants you to draw the sort of metonymy of looking at the hand for Dominique and then the feet for Carol. The first actual image we see of Carol, his feet walking down, and hadn't fully realized it, but an idea that you create a whole body in this sort of democratic sense of partitioning of the body as well. But I wanted to avoid a kind of hokey, they complete each other sense. So I didn't include it, but that's where I was going with that.
Well, I think in the interest of time and a short break,
having
we should
coffee.
We should end. So join me in a round of applause.